stand.
Thank you. Right, well, prynawn da, everyone, and thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you all for turning up on time. You'll notice there's 2 seats at the front. Do you know whose seats they are? My mother. So I've got no idea where she is. When she turns up, she can sit out there in the hallway. So thank you all for coming out to hear me discuss the life of a local boy done good, Sir Rhys ap Thomas. Now, this is the first time I'm ever given this talk. I've written it exclusively for tonight, so I've got no idea how it's going to go. But we've got your money, so tough. Now, the Tudors, of course, they transformed the face of England and Wales forever. They left their mark on this kingdom politically, administratively, religiously, culturally, and architecturally. Henry VIII alone remains one of the most recognisable people who's ever lived. Everyone in the West knows who Henry VIII is. Imagine how many social media followers he would have if he was around today. Now, their rise to the throne was completely astonishing. The Tudors emerged out of Wales to steal the crown, the English crown, from the Plantagenets after 331 years. But what if I told you that it was a Llandeilo man, born and bred in the heart of the Tawy Valley, who was crucial in this rise? Someone who may even have killed Richard III, the very last English king ever to be killed in battle. So today I am going to explore the life of Rhys ap Thomas, the Raven of Abermarleis, as I like to call him. He is someone who can justly be regarded as one of the most influential and powerful Welshmen in all of our storied history. But first, we do need to establish some background. So Rhys was born in the year 1449. He was the son of Thomas ap Griffith of Newton and of Elizabeth Ferch John Griffith of Abermarleis. As a boy, it was his grandfather, Griffith ap Nicholas, who was a shrewd and ruthless local landowner. This man was very much the leading English royal agent in this neck of the woods. Now, officially, Griffith did not hold any power. He was a Welshman who was living in a land that had long been conquered by the English. 168 years earlier, the last Welsh kingdom of Gwynedd had fallen. And since that time, all forms of public office or rank were kept away from Welshmen. They were instead given to English barons who came down and were absentee lords. Great offices like Justiciar and Chamberlain. Even the 3 royal castles that are in the Tawy Valley, Carmarthen, Carrickenen and Drysloin, all of these were held by English stewards. But our Griffith, he very much was a force of nature. He was a man noted in the chronicles for his aggression and his fiery temper. In a period when law and order was beginning to collapse throughout the country under a weak king, it was Griffith ap Nicholas who was able to exploit the power vacuum to, quite frankly, take whatever it was that he wanted. He seems to have actually been something of a bully. He was feared by his fellow Welshmen and he was underestimated by the English officialdom. Now, when the officials in London, when they tried to occasionally rein this man in, or they summoned him to court to answer for his corruption, he simply and arrogantly dismissed the orders. On one occasion, a royal messenger came to him in Dynevor. What Griffith did was he made the man strip naked in front of his court and he had him flogged. He then put on his own colours, his own family colours, onto this royal messenger and sent him packing back to London. Unwilling to be intimidated by the King of England, the bard Lewis Glyn Cothi, a local poet, he simply remarked that Griffith ap Nicholas should be called the Eagle of Carmarthen. Let us take one incident, for example, on New Year's Day in 1448. A man named Owain ap Ieuan ap Philip he accused another man, Ieuan ap Griffith Goch, of a crime. The case was put to our man, Griffith ap Nicholas, who decided, for his own entertainment, rather than judging this case between two of his Welsh tenants, he wanted them to compete in a duel. Whoever killed the other man, then that was judgment. That man must have been speaking the truth. Now, after this duel took place, and one man did kill the other, Griffith was a very unscrupulous man, and he ordered the winner, rather than being given his freedom, rather than being given his justice, he ordered the winner to be seized and beheaded immediately. He even sold his head to his friends as a trophy. A very cruel and tough man this is. Now, by the mid-1450s, Griffith had grown so bold, he had even seized those three royal castles in West Wales, Carmarthen, Carrageenan, and even Aberystwyth up there on the coast. He seized them from the king's men, and he started to use them for his own family. Now, the King's Council in London, they were completely bewildered. Who the hell was this random Welshman who was taking their castles away from them? They needed somebody to go into West Wales and sort this guy out once and for all. Now, the king had a half-brother. The half-brother was called Edmund Tudor, and he was of Welsh descent himself through his father's line. So Edmund Tudor seemed like an ideal person to go into Wales and try to appeal to the Welsh to basically, well, kick Griffith's head in, for lack of a better term. Griffith was a nuisance, and he did not take too kindly to this posh upstart coming down from London to take over his position. Very soon, we have in the chronicles that Griffith ap Nicholas and Edmund Tudor were at war in West Wales. Now, by the end of 1456, after a year of these two men dueling back and forth, Edmund Tudor was dead. He was replaced in West Wales by his brother, Jasper Tudor. Now, England at the same time was descending into a very bitter civil war that we remember as the Wars of the Roses. And Jasper now understood he needed allies. He couldn't just go into West Wales and copy what his brother did. He couldn't go into Wales and go to war with Griffith ap Nicholas. He needed to create an ally. And it worked. Now, Jasper represented the Lancastrian faction in the English court. He was part of the faction that was against the Yorkists. Because he made friends with Griffith, he probably placated his ego. He was able to bring this bully down and have him on his side. From thereafter, Griffith ap Nicholas, the Eagle of Carmarthen, he was a friend to the House of Lancaster. Now, though Griffith would soon die, he left behind two sons, Owain and Thomas ap Griffith, and they continued to fight for rather than against the Tudors. In 1461, the Lancastrians were defeated in a battle. Their king, Henry VI, was removed from the English crown after 39 years. And Jasper Tudor, this Welsh Lancastrian leader, he was forced to flee for his life. He left Wales behind and would not return for another 25 years. Now, nearly every single castle in Wales during this time, in fact, every single castle in England as well, that was in Lancastrian hands, they were soon surrendered. Every castle in England surrendered, and every castle in Wales, except for two. One was Harlech, up on the north coast, and the other one, you might recognise it, it was Castell Carrageenan, not too far from you. Now, this castle, for 3 years, remained in the hands of Griffith ap Nicholas's two sons. They refused to surrender this castle to the victorious Yorkists, even though every other castle in England and Wales, except for one, had also surrendered. But eventually, what do? You can't live in this castle forever. You are surrounded. No food is getting in and nothing is getting out. After 3 years, these sons did eventually surrender. Now, the House of York were furious that these rebellious Welshmen dared to defy them by staying in this castle. So once they got Carrakennan into their hands, they sent 500 of their men into the castle armed with pickaxes, and they tore the place apart. Now, almost every castle we see in this country eventually met its destruction 200 years later during the English Civil War, when cannon fire began to be used. But Carrakennan was torn apart 200 years earlier than that in 1463, and it would never, ever be occupied ever again. It's also the best castle in the world, but that's a different story. Now, when these sons, as I say, they did give up this castle, they exchanged it for a pardon. The reality was they had picked the losing side in a civil war. And the family spent much of the next 20 years pretty much out of favour and out in the cold. They were on the sidelines. We move our story forward 20 years to 1483, a momentous year in English history. It is a year where there were 3 kings on the English throne. And it is this year that opportunity knocked for this particular family. You see, Edward IV, the triumphant king of the House of York, he finally died aged 40. He left behind 2 heirs. He left behind the 12-year-old heir, now King Edward V, and he left behind the 9-year-old spare Prince Richard. But for those who know their history, they will know that neither of these 2 boys would take the throne. Neither of these 2 boys would be crowned the next king. Just 78 days after their father died, it was their uncle who was crowned King of England, and he ascended the throne as King Richard III. These 2 boys were placed into the Tower of London, where they simply disappeared. They are known as the Princes in the Tower. A better name is probably the Missing Princes. We do not know to this day what happened to them. Many people have their theories, but the fact is we do not know. They simply disappeared. Now, Richard III becoming King of England was not popular with everyone. And soon there were many plots and conspiracies to try and bring this king down. Many people actually suspected him of having killed his 2 nephews. In the autumn of 1483, the Duke of Buckingham, another arrogant and haughty English nobleman, he decided he was going to raise a rebellion against his friend Richard III. Now, though he was an English nobleman, he was also the Lord of Brecon, and he decided he was going to use all of his Welsh tenants to lead this rebellion. So messages were sent out to all of the neighbouring lords, landowners, to quickly raise their men and join him in taking down an English king. But Buckingham was a very poor lord. He had a very harsh reputation, and the Welsh loved him not. One man who did not answer Buckingham's call was Rhys ap Thomas, the son of Thomas ap Griffith, the grandson of Griffith ap Nicholas. Now, because Rhys ap Thomas did not respond to this call for rebellion, he was actually rewarded by the king, Richard III. Richard III gave him a pension of 40 marks. 40 marks he gave him for this, for staying loyal to the king. Now, 40 marks, I'm sure some of you don't really know how much that is today. Let me stop you for a minute. Come on. Come on.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, you okay? I was expecting a boo, but fine. You're all lovely Towie Valley people. I get it. Okay, I'm not catching you up. I'll do it later. Okay, so 40 marks. Rhys ap Thomas is rewarded 40 marks by King Richard III. And this is the first sign of royal favour that this family has received in more than 20 years. Now, 40 marks is equal back then to £26, 13 shillings and 4p. Just to give you an idea, back in 1483, this could buy you 18 horses or 70 cows, or 14 stones of wool. Although since Rhys ap Thomas was around here, I'm sure he had absolutely no need for any more wool. But if he wanted to buy some horses or he wanted to buy some cows out of this 40 marks, so he could. It's a decent sum, but that's it. After 20 years, it is just 40 marks he is given for staying loyal to his king and not rebelling. Now, like his grandfather before him, this Rhys ap Thomas, he was a dependable, if low-ranking, royal official. It was his job to hold all of his Towy Valley brethren in check. And he probably did this with far less disorder than his Tadci had done before him. But I wonder, for Rhys ap Thomas, was he living with these stories coming to him all the time, telling him what a bold man that Eagle of Carmarthen, his grandfather, had once been? I'm sure this constantly weighed on our Rhys's mind. But this was the best. This was the best that a Welshman living under an English system could do. An English system which had kept them down and out of power for more than 200 years. But soon, very soon, a new man was being put forward. A new man was being proposed as an alternative King of England. And that was the Welsh-born, Welsh-bred and Welsh-raised Henry Tudor. A young Welshman who had been forced to flee his homeland as a boy and escape into exile. Now, through his English mother, this Henry Tudor, he was actually descended from a previous King of England. But it wasn't that grand. He was simply the great-great-great-grandson of King Edward III. But a 30-year civil war has just ended. All of the other alternatives for the English crown have either been killed or they are still children. Now, people are looking to this 28-year-old Welshman who is slightly descended from an English king over there in Brittany. They're looking at him and they're saying, please come back and lead us. Now, straight away, Rhys ap Thomas fell under suspicion from King Richard III of being a potential supporter of this rebel Henry Tudor. And this makes a lot of sense when you consider the family's recent past. Now, one method that Richard III used to enforce the loyalty of those men that he did not trust was to have their sons sent to court. He wanted their sons sent to court so he could hold them as hostages. Now, when Rhys was asked to give up his 4-year-old boy, he got the Abbot of Tarley to write a letter back to this powerful King of England. He pleaded that his son was much too young to be handed over. But Rhys said he would happily plead an extra oath of loyalty if this would put Richard III's mind at rest. Now, we know not what Rhys ap Thomas's intentions were at this moment in time in 1483. But after 2 years of very careful planning, the Tudors did eventually invade from France. They landed in Mill Bay, Pembrokeshire on the 7th of August, 1485. Now, when they landed at Mill Bay, the Tudor army had around 2,000 French mercenaries, just simply paid fighters who had come along to kill some Englishmen. They had about 500 English rebels who were there, and they had a handful of Scots who just wanted to come along for a scrap. What Henry Tudor needed, if he was going to challenge the King of England, what he needed was people he knew, people he could trust, people he could depend on. He needed the people that he had grown up with. This is why when he invaded from France, he set the sat-nav to return home. He set it for Pembrokeshire. Now, according to a later family legend that was written about 200 years later, Rhys ap Thomas was actually at Mill Bay to welcome Henry Tudor ashore. A similar tradition, again written by the family 200 years ago, it records that Rhys's oath to Richard III, the oath he had sworn to Richard III, had included the lines that he would only let Henry Tudor enter Wales over his belly. The insinuation being Rhys would have to be on the floor dead for Henry Tudor to enter Wales. Now, the tradition says that Rhys ap Thomas did not want to break his oath to the king. So, what he did was he stood under a bridge a couple of miles inland, Mullock Bridge. He stood under the bridge and Henry marched across the bridge on his horse and therefore above his belly. By doing that, Rhys was absolved of his oath. Do you know what? It's a nice story, but it's nonsense. It simply doesn't make any sense whatsoever that you could break an oath as easily as that. But it is a nice story, and it is one that when people raise Rhys ap Thomas, they always mention, oh yeah, he was the guy who lay on the floor over there in Mill Bay. There is no evidence Rhys ap Thomas was anywhere near Pembrokeshire at this time. It doesn't make any sense for him to be over there in Pembrokeshire. In fact, he was still here in the Llandeilo area on his estates. It was his job to guard those estates in the Tawy Valley, and that is where he was when Henry Tudor invaded with this army. Now, the Tudor army went north. They began a very grueling 2-week march across some of that very inhospitable terrain, like the Preseli Mountains. They pushed on through Haverfordwest, Cardigan, Aberystwyth, Machynlleth, before they decided to turn east towards Welshpool and beyond it to central England. 2 weeks this army marched through Wales, drawing Welshmen to their side along the way. Now, thousands of men were doing this march. Thousands of men carrying supplies, weapons, billhooks, whatever they could get their hands on, whatever they could carry. Thousands of men of different accents, different backgrounds, all completing this march. It's hard enough in a car today. God knows what it must have been like by foot. Now, Rhys ap Thomas had around 2,000 of his own men come to him at Llandeilo. Again, just to reiterate, Henry Tudor has between 2,000 to 3,000 men in total. Rhys ap Thomas is such a powerful local Welshman, he can call on 2,000 men of his own. And these are going to be men from his estates. So these 2,000 are going to include men from Llandeilo, Llangadog, Myddfai, Abermalaes, Caio, Lampeter, Llanwrda, Derwydd, and Llandybia. All of these men came to Rhys ap Thomas and they began to march with him. What Rhys ap Thomas is doing is he's going to shadow Henry's march north. Henry's going up the coast. Richard III has told Rhys ap Thomas, your job is to stop this happening. Rhys hasn't stopped it yet, but he's now going to shadow this march north. So what he does is he heads out from Llandeilo. He goes up Llandyfri. He goes across to Brecon. He goes up to Rhyadr, Llanidloes, Montgomery, and into Welshpool. He follows much of the modern A470 and the A483. It's of course unknown if he stopped at Newtown's very famous McDonald's en route, or if he ever got stuck behind a tractor. And yes, I'm aware there's now a lovely bypass, but I love this McDonald's, okay? It's a great one. And it is now that things get very, very interesting. Both before and after invading Wales, the bards, those social media influencers of their day, they are now beginning to pump out propaganda, poems that are saying that Henry Tudor is none other than the son of prophecy. He is the Messiah who has been foretold, and he is the man who's been sent by God to come and free the Welsh. This is the propaganda the bards are beginning to pump out. And Henry liked this. He used this to appeal himself to all of the Welsh community leaders and demand that they raise all of their men, not for this tyrant on the English throne, but for him. And it generally worked. There were scores of Welshmen who were coming to Henry Tudor's side, but not everyone had declared for him yet. Now, as his men reached this mountain, Long Mountain, Cefn Digoch, near Welshpool, a windswept ridge which looked down on Welshpool and beyond it, the fertile plains of Shropshire. As Henry Tudor's men rested on this mountain, a warning went up. There is an army. An army is approaching, and it puts everybody on edge. When they look up, they see slowly approaching on the horizon this vast army, and above it, a banner. And the banner is a white banner with a black chevron, and it's got 3 ravens on it. It is the Raven of Abermalas. It is Rhys ap Thomas. He has completed his own march, and he now has also got to Long Mountain. This must have been an incredibly tense moment. As I said, it is Rhys's job to stop Henry Tudor from reaching England. It is his duty to his king to wipe out this pretender. But no such thing happened. Instead, Henry Tudor and Rhys ap Thomas, they meet for the very first time. They exchange pleasantries. They probably shared a drink before they got down to business. They may even have discussed how their families had been entwined across previous generations. Remember, Jasper Tudor, Henry's uncle, is there. He's now an aging man. But he had been the one who 20 and 30 years earlier had been fighting and making friendships with Rhys's father and grandfather. Now, what is more, Henry Tudor and Rhys ap Thomas are actually distantly related. They shared a mutual ancestor in the 12th century titan of North Wales politics, known as Ednyffed Vychan. A man who was so tenacious in battle with the English, he had the nickname the Terror of England. A brutal man, and he is their mutual ancestor. They were both also descended from somebody known as Rhys ap Griffith, better known as the Lord Rhys, the Prince of all of South Wales, who at one point ruled all of Wales from his castle at Dynevor. I don't care what Cardiff says, this is the real capital of Wales. It was back then, and it still is today, as far as I am concerned. Back to Long Mountain. As Rhys and Henry are chatting back and forth, they struck a remarkable deal. In exchange for all of Rhys's men, in exchange for all of his Towy Valley men, what Rhys wanted from Henry Tudor was complete political dominance in South Wales if the Tudors won. It is the kind of dominance a Welshman had not had for over 200 years. Now, Henry Tudor, remember, is not an Englishman like previous kings of England. He is born and bred in West Wales. He is brought up amongst the Welsh. He knows them, and he's far less prejudiced towards the Welsh as other kings of England are. He looks at Rhys's men. He looks at Rhys, probably. I don't have a source for it, but I'm going to assume that's what happened. And he agrees. He agrees, okay, you have political dominance, and I have your men. Now, another week of marching takes place once they come down off Long Island until the 22nd of August, 1485, the Tudor army, now swollen with 2,000 and more Welsh recruits, they found the King's army waiting for them. They found the King's army blocking their path. The time for talking, as Claudia Winkleman might say on The Traitors, was truly over. Now, I'm going to demonstrate this next part of the talk using some pictures taken from the annual Bosworth Battlefield Medieval Festival, which takes place every August. If you haven't been, I thoroughly recommend you do go and check it out. It is an incredible festival. What we have, just like all medieval battles do in the 15th century, is we begin a battle with an exchange of fire, of arrow fire and cannon. We have two main divisions, two main sections of each side who come and meet in the middle after all of the arrows have been loosed, and they go toe to toe with swords, billhooks, daggers, pikes and hammers. It was brutal, it was bloody, and it would have been absolutely terrifying. Or at least for everyone except this soldier that I know. Now, after a certain period, the Tudor side did begin to gain the upper hand, and Richard's lines threatened to break. Richard's men threatened to escape and run. Whenever a line breaks in a medieval battle, it's completely game over. Once you turn and start to run, you are going to get wiped out. It is known as the rout. It is known as the slaughter. You are finished. Nobody gets to run away from a medieval army. But Richard's lines are threatening to break. Men are realizing the Tudor side, they've got too much about them. What Richard III decides to do is he takes a very fateful decision. He decides he's going to take decisive action to bring this battle to an end once and for all. In the very distance, he could see Henry Tudor, who is protected at the back by just a small bodyguard. Henry Tudor is not a warrior. He is not there in the middle of the fighting himself. He is at the back, protected by a Welsh bodyguard. What Richard decides to do is he pulls his visor down, he summons a collection of his household knights to his side, and he gives his horse a kick. What he does is he begins one of the last great cavalry charges of the medieval period. They thunder across the field, about 20 to 30 knights on horseback going straight across the field, headed straight for Henry Tudor's position. If Richard, with his sword in his hand, if he could take Henry Tudor out, everything is over. You kill the opposing commander, the job is done. He could be enjoying his lunch by midday. And what a sight it must have been, captured here in a painting by a friend of mine known as Graham Turner. He has Richard completely crashing in to the Tudor side. We can see Henry Tudor at the back going, come on, let's get him. But he's probably saying, oh God, I'm finished. This is Henry Tudor's standard bearer, the man who waved the flag. He would have been thigh to thigh with Henry Tudor throughout this battle, and Richard takes him out. A couple of inches to the other side, he would have wiped out Henry Tudor. You know, when the Richard III, when his household knights crash in to the Tudor side, it must have been such a cacophony of noise. It must have been a lot of, clashing of steel on steel. There would have been bones breaking. There would have been blood-curdling screams taking place. And what happened next is one of the most infamous moments in all of English history. Richard is about to close in on Henry Tudor. He has his prey in his sights. And he's only at this moment, seconds away from victory, Richard is betrayed. During this battle, there is a third army waiting on the side. They are known as the Stanleys. Richard believes they should be loyal to him. At the last minute, the Stanleys betray Richard. They come crashing into him from the side. Richard is pushed over. He is overwhelmed by this onslaught, and he is gradually unhorsed. His horse, in fact, is stuck in a marsh. Despite fighting courageously, in what was a frenzied and furious onslaught, we are told by the chronicles that Richard was pierced with numerous deadly wounds. Now the question is, of course, who killed King Richard III, the last Plantagenet king of England? Who ended the life of the last king to die in battle? The sober truth, unfortunately, is that we will never know for certain what exactly took place in this bloody chaos more than 500 years ago. But there are a few things to take note of. According to a Burgundian chronicler named Jean Molyneux, he understood, his intelligence told him that it was actually a Welshman armed with a halbert that did the job. Now, the halbert was a fearsome two-handed instrument of death that carried a slicing blade on top of a pole. You can see in the middle, this is what a halbert was. And it very much was associated with the Welsh troops of this day, and in particular with the troops of Sir Rhys ap Thomas. As I say, it's a slicing axe, effectively, on top of a pole. We have a very interesting poem. So we have Jean Molyneux saying it was a Welshman with a halberd. We have a very interesting poem written by a bard named Tudor Glyn. And this has been ignored for several hundred years, apart from in the annals of Welsh academia. And the poem reports how King Henry won the day through the strength of our master, killing Englishmen, capable hand, killing the boar, he shaved his head. Now the boar is Richard III's badge. Henry Tudor has the red dragon. Richard III has the white boar. This poet is saying Rhys ap Thomas killed the boar and he shaved his head. Now, nothing was given much credence to these lines by this Welsh poet until 2012, when in a remarkable discovery, Richard III's skeletal remains were found beneath a Leicester car park. You might remember some of this on the news. Modern technology, once the skeleton had been removed from that car park, modern technology revealed the key injuries that the king suffered in his final moments. In particular, he had 9 separate wounds detected on his skull alone. Now, I was going to show a picture of this skull because we have it. It's readily available, but I didn't want to trigger any of you by chucking up a massive skull on the screen. But you can either Google it or come and see me afterwards and I'll simply show you a picture of it. It is very visual, and what it reveals when we look at Richard III's skull is he has a dagger piercing right there in the cheek, all the way through to the back of his skull. Another dagger done by a rondel dagger, which is designed so you can push the dagger down. It goes straight through the top of his head all the way down to the jaw. But most importantly, on the back of the skull, there is an entire section of Richard's skull missing. And the working hypothesis is that could only have been done with a halberd. It quite literally shaved the back of Richard III's head. These would have been devastating injuries. Each one of those would have been a fatal blow to Richard III. They must have been traumatic to witness as he is being set upon by all of these Welshmen. Is this what Tudor Glyn is saying? That Rhys ap Thomas killed the boar and shaved his head? I think at the very least we can place Rhys ap Thomas at the crime scene, but we cannot quite pin the crime of regicide on him yet. The chances are there were many, many men involved in this most brutal of killings in just a couple of seconds on that field. They really did a number on Richard III. And this is the reenactment where we have someone dressed up as Rhys ap Thomas going toe-to-toe with Richard III. Now, a local tradition does record that after Rhys's victory at Bosworth, he celebrated by bringing a large boulder back home from this Leicestershire field, a trophy, if you will. Some of you may recognise this. Just before Abermalei's caravan park, on the way to Llandeilo, near the lay-by where you get the really good bacon rolls, in fact, lie this. This boulder, this stone, is 9 feet tall, and it's known locally as the Bosworth Stone. The tradition is Rhys ap Thomas brought this back from Bosworth as a trophy. Again, it's a very nice story, but we've always got to be careful when it comes to local traditions. This type of stone cannot be found anywhere in the English Midlands. I don't know where it came from, but it most certainly was not dragged back from the centre of England behind a horse. But nonetheless, it's a nice bit of folklore, and it reminds us of the part that this son of Abermalei's played in taking down an English king and placing the Tudors on the throne. Take a look at it next time you get your bacon rolls. Now, even before he had washed the blood from his fists, Rhys was rewarded on the battlefield by the new Tudor king with a knighthood. Again, Welshmen were not knighted very, very rarely during the previous 200 years. Rhys ap Thomas on the battlefield is now being knighted by the new Tudor king. In the months that followed, Henry Tudor proved as good as his word. In November 1485, a couple of months later, Rhys is appointed constable, lieutenant and steward of the very rich English lordship of Brecon. He is made steward of Builth. He is made chamberlain of the counties of Carmarthenshire and Cardigan. This is now the man who manages all of the crown revenues and handles all government business for the English crown. It must have blown everyone's minds that a rebellious Welshman was being given these offices. A decade later, after the king's uncle Jasper Tudor dies, Rhys is also appointed Justiciar of South Wales, the man who is responsible for administering justice for the crown. It's the very top job there ever was in the Principality. Now, no Welshman had ever been entrusted with such power by an English king. This prompted one poet to write, "All the kingdom is the king's, save where Rhys doth spread his wings." It's fair to say that Rhys ap Thomas gambled on Henry Tudor, and it paid off for both men. He was a warrior through and through, and he was deeply respected by the English for his fighting prowess. He continued to serve the Tudor crown in a military capacity in the decades that followed. We have Rhys ap Thomas front and centre fighting for the Tudor army, defeating rebels in battle in the year 1487 and 1497. When England invades France in 1492, Rhys ap Thomas is there with several thousand of his Towy Valley men. He is now also one of Henry Tudor's leading war councillors. And the pair do seem to actually have enjoyed something of a warm relationship. Rhys was at Henry's coronation. He was created a Knight of the Body. This is a role that is only given to the most trusted men who are allowed to be in the king's company. Often, we have the payment records for this, often Henry Tudor would give payments to Rhys ap Thomas for him to purchase Welsh mead and Welsh cheese and have them sent up to London. Now, I live in London and my family tend to send me Penderyn whiskey or Welsh cakes every now and then. The same thing is happening with Henry Tudor. A Welshman born and raised, he remembers how good that mead tasted and he wants his friend Rhys to send him these barrels. And Rhys, of course, is only too happy to do so. Now, when the king wanted to commemorate his father, Edmund Tudor, who is buried in a monastery in Carmarthen, it was to Rhys ap Thomas that the Tudor king turned. It was Rhys ap Thomas who was the man who would commission a brand new tomb dedicated to Edmund Tudor. When the monastery in Carmarthen closed down, replaced by Tesco's as it is today, the tomb was actually removed, and some of you may recognise this. It is in St David's Cathedral right before the altar. The tomb of the father of Henry VII, the grandfather of Henry VIII, and it was built by Rhys ap Thomas. I mean, not personally, obviously, but he was the man in charge of the project for this. Now, what's more, one of the closest companions to Henry VII's son, Prince Arthur, his beloved heir, one of the closest companions to him was Rhys ap Thomas's own son, Griffith. They're always Griffith during this period, obviously. And this could only be sanctioned by the king. When the Tudor king looks at his beloved son, Prince Arthur, only the very best people who come from the very best families could be allowed to be around his son. The boy he hopes will become the next King Arthur II. And the number one boy who was allowed around his son was Rhys ap Thomas's son, Griffith. Now, Griffith was somebody who was himself also a very impressive person. But sadly, there would not be a second King Arthur, which was quite devastating in many ways for England and Wales, because it meant that we did get Henry VIII instead. Prince Arthur died aged just 15 in the year 1502, and this devastated young Griffith. When he died 20 years later, he made sure that he was going to be buried very close to where Prince Arthur was buried in Worcester. This tomb is still there today, can still be visited. The tomb of Rhys ap Thomas's son, and very prominent, we can see the family ravens, the ravens of Abermarlais on this tomb there, 500 years old in Worcester. But back to the father, Rhys ap Thomas. Through his devoted service, Rhys was able to accumulate considerable riches. He became probably the most wealthiest Welshman that ever was to this point in time. His status was on par with a wealthy English magnate, and soon he outgrew his two main homes at Newton and at Abermarlais. They were no longer considered fit for purpose. Now, despite having a hall with Flanders tile, very expensive, and a slate roof, and being built in the centre of a deer park, Newton was regarded during this period by one visitor as simply ruinous. The same visitor did go a couple of miles up the road and did record that Abermarlais consisted of a very nice stone structure surrounded by a moat, but this was now being too small for a man, an ambitious man like Rhys ap Thomas. One of his recent acquisitions had been Carew Castle in Pembrokeshire, and now Rhys began the move. He got the removal men in, he left behind the Towy Valley, and he headed down to Carew in Pembrokeshire. And he took steps to resurrect what had been a mighty Norman fortress that had been built to try and cower and intimidate previous generations of Welsh into submission. Now Rhys moved in and he began to renovate this castle. He rebuilt the Great Hall, he added new windows, he added multiple fireplaces, and he added a 3-storey porch with steps that led up into the hall. It doesn't sound like much, but this would have been glitzy. This would have been state of the art for the period, and it was not somewhere in the area surrounding London. It was in West Wales. Above the porch, he actually had Henry VII's royal coat of arms engraved, and this proudly displayed the Red Dragon of Wales. The Red Dragon of Wales was a part now of the English king's personal coat of arms. When the work was completed at Carew, Rhys had constructed a home that was on par with anything the great English earls or dukes could boast themselves. The Welsh bards even considered this to be comparable to King Arthur's famous Camelot. In 1505, so this is, let me do the maths, 20 years since the Battle of Bosworth, Rhys ap Thomas was officially inducted into the Order of the Garter. This was his greatest honour. At any time, you can only have 21 people in the order. New people can only be inducted when somebody dies, and that's still the case to the present day. In 1505, some unlucky person has died, and Rhys is now being given the honour. This is an immense and very public display of trust in this particular Welshman from Llandeilo. He is, in fact, only the second ever Welshman to ever be inducted into this order. Now, every inductee, they have what is called a garter stall, a small metal plate, and this is screwed into St. George's Chapel in Windsor. You can still go there today and see the garter stalls of every single person who's ever been inducted. Rhys's is still there, and it has his motto, Secret et Hardy, silent and strong. I think that's a pretty good motto, and I'm completely the opposite, but there we go. Now, to celebrate his induction, 2 years later, Rhys held a great celebration at Carew Castle. He held a massive jousting competition where he invited 500 knights to come from all over Europe into West Wales to compete in his competition. It was something that he could prove generous to, and it was a way of him spreading his name throughout Europe. Now, 2 years later, 1509, Henry VII, the first Tudor King of England, he dies in his palace in Richmond. But Rhys ap Thomas, his career is not over. He, of course, transfers his loyalty to the king's son, Henry VIII, and he keeps all of his offices. He even goes on to play another leading role in Henry VIII's famous invasion of France in 1513. We are told by the chronicles he commanded 3,000 men. There is one famous episode that was recorded at this time. A French force of around 6,000 men appeared on a hill overlooking the English camp. And the English soldiers, the English barons, they do not know what to do. The French have appeared. They're surely going to come down and wipe out the English camp. Rhys, in his mid-60s mind at this point, he doesn't miss a beat. These are recorded in the English reports of the time. He quickly gathered a small selection of pikemen to come with him, and he just marches straight into the Frenchmen. A handful of Welshmen just go straight for 6,000 French. And for some reason, the French turn and run. They are spooked by this mad Welshman who's decided to come and go for them. In his mid-60s, all of this only raises Rhys ap Thomas's esteem among the English as a fighting man. We are even told he managed to kill 20 Frenchmen. For this, he was recorded by our English chronicler as a gentleman of such spirit and a very valiant knight. In 1520, in his 71st year, Rhys once more completed the very arduous journey from West Wales over to the continent. It was his job to now arrange personal security for King Henry VIII for what was a very tense political summit known as the Field of Cloth of Gold. Never before and never afterwards has there ever been a political summit like the Field of Cloth of Gold. All of this is just tents that have been built to appear like castles and to appear in gold. It was the richest celebration, the richest political summit ever. And Rhys ap Thomas was there with Henry VIII as the personal security for the meeting of the King of England with a King of France. This is basically like Glastonbury times 20. It was a huge, huge event. Now, Rhys retained his grip on authority in West Wales throughout this period and South Wales. He controlled everything from Herefordshire over to Cardigan Bay. He did so until he died, aged 76 in 1525. He had not only lived through the entire of the Wars of the Roses, he had lived deep into the reign of Henry VIII, which is pretty good going if you know anything about his reign. He lived under no less than 6 kings. He truly was a great survivor. Now, Rhys was buried in Carmarthen Greyfriars Monastery, the same place that Henry VIII's father, Edmund Tudor, had also been laid to rest. Now, his tomb was also moved after this monastery was closed, but it wasn't moved very far. It was simply moved up the road to St. Peter's Church in Carmarthen, where this grand monument stands today to this son of the Towie. It is said he left behind around £12,000 in silver and gold coin. That is some remarkable treasure for anyone during this period. Now, he had set up his family very well for them to kick on and become one of the great families of British history, but things very quickly went awry after the great man had died. Rhys's heir was actually his grandson, another Rhys, Rhys ap Griffith. But he was not able to curry the same political favour as his grandfather had. The younger Rhys was a very rash man. He was a bold man. And he kept on attacking the English baron who had replaced him as the head of government here in Carmarthen. Once Rhys ap Thomas dies, the English crown, they go back to giving the positions to Englishmen, not to Welshmen. The younger Rhys, he goes to war with this English baron, and soon he's declaring himself the Prince of Wales. Very dangerous to do during the reign of Henry VIII, who does exactly what you expect him to do. He has the younger Rhys's head simply chopped off and stuck on a pike. All of the family estates, including Newton and Albemarle's, all of them are taken into custody. They are all taken into royal hands. They are now dished out to Englishmen. Newton, Albemarle's, Carew, they all get repurposed to Englishmen. And across the next few generations, the family are penniless, and they are repeatedly petitioning kings and queens of England to give them their estates back. But it is to no avail. Now, from the 1530s onwards, most Welshmen, they stop using the Welsh patronymics. Rhys ap Thomas, Griffith ap Nicholas, and so on. They stop using that, and they begin to adopt English type surnames. What Rhys's descendants decide to do is they decide to take on the surname Rhys. So we have Griffith ap Rhys. He decides his surname now is Rhys going forward. And we have the Rhys family. We have Walter Rhys, Henry Rhys, Edward Rhys, several generations of MPs living up into the 16th and 17th century. Tory MPs for Carmarthen. But they are local figures now. They are not national. They are certainly not international. They are just local men who are just MPs. But the family did eventually get back on its feet, but not until the year 1793, when the Tory MP George Rhys, who is this geezer here, he was created the third Baron de Neville. Spelt the English way, of course. George Rhys was able to get the property at Newton back, and he built this house, which again I'm sure some of you know. The Rhyses owned Albemarle's and de Neville and Newton. They owned these estates until 1974, when financial ruin once again made them lose those lands. De Neville Castle and Newton House were taken over by the National Trust, and the current Baron is still with us. He is the 10th Baron de Neville, Hugo Rhys. I don't know if you're in the room, Hugo, maybe you are. Maybe you're interested in your family history. But what he actually knows of his family, who knows? The 10th Baron of de Neville, they are now based down in Somerset. So to end about this remarkable family, and in particular, this remarkable man. Rhys ap Thomas was a battle-hardened raven. He dared to soar higher than any of his ancestors could ever have dreamt, or his ambitious descendants could ever have hoped. Few men, English or Welsh, had ever done so well out of the Tudor accession as Rhys ap Thomas. Now, as I said at the beginning, the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, it transformed the face of England and Wales forever. It triggered a series of events that did lay the foundations for the eventual formation of a new Britain. One might question if any of that happens, if Rhys ap Thomas did not put his Towy Valley army at Henry Tudor's disposal back on Long Mountain. If Rhys had wiped out Henry Tudor, everything that follows might never have happened. Now, for good reason, when Rhys ap Thomas dies in 1525, there is an English chronicler who simply reports, Rhys ap Thomas was the flower of all Welshmen. For us, I think we can all be simply content with local boy done good. Thank you. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer. Or you can buy more cake, or you can go and stretch your legs.
Anybody got questions?
What language would it speak?
Definitely Welsh. We have to remember that Wales was a monoclot country up until the 1891 census. So everyone in Wales was speaking Welsh, most certainly for another 300 or 400 years after this. I don't know about the English. I don't know how proficient he would have been in English. He must have picked some up to be able to do a lot of the court business. So I would have to presume that he was at least learned a little bit in English. He, of course, would have known Latin. Latin would have been some of the language used, at least for the official job that he did later do. But yeah, most certainly Welsh. Come on, just go outside. Still Welsh around here today.
Was he under the guardianship of William Herbert?
I don't know who asked the question, but was he under the... who was? Henry Tudor?
Yeah, when he was
Yes.
the guardianship of William Herbert.
Yes, he was. So Henry Tudor, when he was 4 years old, he was found abandoned in Pembroke Castle, and William Herbert, who was an enemy of the Tudor family during the wars, he bought the rights to Henry Tudor. He moved Henry Tudor from Pembroke Castle. He moved him to Raglan Castle, where for the next 10 years, Henry Tudor, a Lancastrian boy, is being raised by the Yorkists. He's been raised by the enemy of his family. And it's, again, for good reason, we believe, without any actual evidence, I have to say, but we do believe that Henry Tudor would also have been able to speak Welsh. At the very least, he would get a second language GCSE today, because he is raised at Raglan Castle. He is raised in the heart of the greatest Welsh cultural hub there was in the medieval period. All of the books, all of the poets, all of the bards in the 15th century, they were based at Raglan, because William Herbert was such a powerful and influential Welshman. Back to Griffith ap Nicholas, we know that their ancestor, the Lord Rhys, held an Eisteddfod in, I think, the year 1154 in Cardigan. And it was Griffith ap Nicholas who revived the idea of an Eisteddfod in the 1450s. So again, this family were also very much patrons of the Welsh cultural arts. So Rhys ap Thomas would have known Welsh folklore, Welsh history. It is a remarkable story. We have to remember the importance of the Welsh aspect in this story. It is one that often gets omitted and written out, initially by Victorian historians and now still by English historians. But don't worry, I'm working on it to put it all back. Go on, one. I'll do them two then.
I was going to say, do you know what the fellow Welsh lords took of Henry Tudor's promise to Rhys for obviously political dominance, and how did he ensure loyalty after that?
So Rhys ap Thomas already had the respect, even if it was fear, of South Welshmen, because everyone knew that this family, they were powerful and they were not, they were very ruthless in enforcing their power. So Rhys ap Thomas, of course, at the end of the day, he has the might to enforce the people around him. People aren't going to follow him unless they fear him, and he's already able to garner that support of 2,000 men. So when Henry Tudor gives him this power, well, they're still following him anyway. We don't know. We don't have any records of what individual Welshmen would have believed at this time. But it's like, what's that saying, with a tide raises boats. You know, Rhys ap Thomas rising is a rise for all Welshmen. And he wasn't just the only Welshman. There are dozens and dozens of Welshmen who were given jobs under Henry Tudor. In the north, there's another powerful Welshman called Rhys Fawr ap Meredydd, Rhys the Mighty. And he's given much of the same power that Rhys ap Thomas is given in South Wales, but he is in the north. The problem for this Rhys in the north is his lands border some of the great English barons, who of course are still nudging him back into his place. So it's a case of a victory for Rhys is a victory for all of us, because they have not had anything for the previous 300 to 400 years. If we just shift the story onto 1530, the Acts of Union, which are passed by Henry VIII, are very controversial in Wales today because they're viewed as the moment that Wales was annexed into England. And it's viewed as the end of Wales. And this is people today not understanding history. They're looking at things from a modern nationalist perspective. They're not looking at things from contemporary reports. Wales had already been annexed 250 years earlier when they got conquered in 1282. What the Acts of Union are doing is it's giving the Welshmen the same parity as Englishmen. So, of course, Wales wasn't given independence under the Tudors, but they were raised from year to equal standing with the English. It's only after 1530 do we start to get MPs who are able to go to London and represent the Welsh. The whole end of the 16th century is the story of Welsh families building up great power and great landed estates. They are finally being given an opportunity. So I think that is also very important to stress. But like I say, a victory for one Welshman is a victory for everyone at this moment in time. And I think we'll take one more.
I was just going to ask you, what inspired you to start writing about it in the beginning? You know, what was it about?
Boredom. No, I mean, look, you know, I'm born and raised around this area. I've got family from Tali, family from Canada, family from all over this area. And when you do spend a lot of time around here, you do get taken in by the stories of the castle, the story of ancient Welshmen. And, you know, I did have an interest in the Tudors at one point, but I don't care about Henry VIII and his wives. He's just a posh boy who's a spoiled brat, who is, quite frankly, just not a very likeable person. But at the beginning of every single book about Henry VIII, is the story of his Welsh self-made father from Pembroke, who had managed to come along and win the crown. And going back to 2009, nobody was writing books about Henry VII. Before 2009, there had been 2 academic books written in 90 years. Now, Henry VII is the trendy king, the trendy Tudor king to study, because people have realised there's so much in this story to look at. And then, of course, once you study Henry VII, you're also casting around for the people around him. And I tell you what I do like is that in this study, it can get quite heated online, as everything does these days. And you always have this idea that people online go, if I was alive back then, I would have picked this side to follow. Nobody picks this side to follow during the medieval period. You follow your lord. Whatever your lord tells you to do, you do it. You don't get to pick your side. With that said, my ancestors are from Tali. Rhys ap Thomas was the lord of Tali. He's the lord of Newton. He's the lord of Llandeilo. So what can I say? I know which side I would have picked. I would have been on the winning side right there. So I like that. And it does make me want to study Rhys ap Thomas much more, because he is himself a fascinating local figure. And as we know, it's all fun and games researching the great and the good, but there are much more interesting stories way down the social scale to investigate. Thank you.
One question about the value of the Act of Union. I thoroughly agree with you when you say that what the Act of Union did was to give Wales parity with England at that time. I don't know the answer to this question, and I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about it. Do you think it would have been possible to sort of achieve that in terms of realpolitik without the controversial provision in the Act declaring that all official business, no official business conducted in Welsh would be paid for?
Yeah.
In other words, saying that official business had to be in English, I presume, to make the whole system work.
Yes, so anything with the Welsh language is, of course, a very emotive issue, and a lot of the feelings about the Tudors in Wales today are that they're Bradwyr, they're traitors. They're the men who turned their back on Wales by provisions such as that in the Act of Union, which says that all official language has to be done in English. And that's been taken by modern nationalists to be the Tudors cancelled the Welsh language. The Tudors banned the Welsh language. That is categorically not what happened. What they said was official business has to be done in English. And of course, that does have a knock-on effect. Major families like the Rhyses are now educating their children in English alongside Welsh, but in English. And gradually, these major families are becoming anglicised. But that's not to say that the vast majority of Welsh people living in the 15th century are suddenly speaking English. It is just the language of officialdom. And if you're looking at things from London's point of view, it makes sense. They've got rid of Welsh law. They've got rid of what's called marcher law, which is its own independent lawship. They've imposed English law on Wales, but they've said, if you follow our system, you can now have, whereas in the past they couldn't have. They're not, bilingualism is a controversial topic even today in government, because some people complain it costs too much money to print everything twice. The sign shouldn't be in 2 languages. I don't know who complains about that, but people do complain about it. Back then, they didn't have the provisions to be able to do a fully bilingual system. So if you wanted to work for the government, you do so in English. But what I do take great issue with is this idea that the Tudors cancelled the Welsh language, because we have to remember the Welsh language would have died out. Same as Scots-Irish, same as Gaelic, same as Cornish, if it had not been for one thing, and that is Queen Elizabeth I granting the Welsh their own Bible. Now, she had very good political reasons to do so. She, of course, was leading a Reformation. She wanted the Welsh, a very conservative people, to be Protestants like her rather than Catholics. There's good political reasons, but the bottom line is, by giving the Welsh their own Bible, it codified and created the Welsh language for the first time as we would recognise it today. So I don't understand how people can say the Tudors took away the Welsh language when one of the Tudors essentially saved the Welsh language for us. And the 1901 census is there for everybody to read. Wales was a majority-speaking country until the turn of the 20th century. The decline in the Welsh language is because of Victorian industrialisation. It's got nothing to do with the Tudors. It's to do with the vast increases in coal mines, steelworks, and it's essentially mass migration from Cornwall and Somerset into what is now the South Welsh valleys. So no, I don't really think it would have worked, to answer your question, in a very long, rambling, ranty, semi-political, half-historical way, that Welsh would have worked for the officials. But yeah, it's not a case, as many people believe, that Welsh was simply outlawed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we done?
Yeah.
Everybody done? Everybody can have teas and coffees and wines and cakes?
Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you.